Aloha and welcome to Think Tech, where we're raising public awareness about issues in technology, energy, globalism, and diversification. As part of the Think Tech series, today's show is Global Connections, and I'm your host, Carlos Juarez. I'm delighted to be welcoming today a special guest coming to us all the way from Central Europe in Slovenia, a great country we're going to learn a little bit about, but really a very good conversation about many issues. First, I want to tell you that we're excited to be coming to you live from the Pioneer Plaza at the core of downtown Honolulu, here in the Think Tech Hawaii studios. And joining me today is Ziga Vodovnik. Ziga, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Carlos, thank you for having me here.
Yes, I'm very delighted, and as I'll introduce him in just a moment, he's a professor of political science at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, a charming country in Central Europe, and we're going to have a fascinating conversation about a range of issues, some of his own research interests, but also some reflections on teaching and working with students here in Hawaii at the Hawaii Pacific University, as well as other experiences he's had on the mainland U.S. We're going to talk about a range of issues from globalization, democratization, and some of the challenges that countries like Slovenia and other emerging democracies face, and a range of issues like social movements and how they both are, either flourishing, prospering, or what opportunities the current era of globalization offers to social movements in many places. But first, I want to remind all of our listeners that we broadcast live on the internet daily at 2 and at 4 p.m. And all of our shows, of course, are streamed on ustream.tv or on Spreaker.com. And if you want links to any of our live streams, or previous broadcasts, you can just go to thinktechhawaii.com. If you'd like to join us here in the downtown studio anytime, come join us here. You can write to that's Jay, at thinktechhawaii.com. So back to our guest. Ziga, I want to thank you again, and a great opportunity for us to learn a little bit about. First, I want to just have you give us a snapshot about yourself. Tell us about your background, what it is you do in Slovenia, and what brings you all the way out here to the middle of the Pacific.
I am a professor of political science at the University of Ljubljana, and my teaching and research is focused on political ideas and social movements. Mm-hmm. My focus is more or less on American social movements, and it's funny because my PhD was on one very small chapter in rich history of American history on Union Transcendentalism. Mm-hmm. And because my research is focused on this tiny group of intellectuals, I was more or less forced to travel to the States to do my research. Mm-hmm. I was doing my PhD in Boston, Massachusetts, my research for PhD at Boston University, and this was my first trip to the States. And later on, when I received my position back in Slovenia, I was also finishing doing my postdoc research once again at Boston, but this time at Howard University. And later on, I also held many research or teaching positions across the states. Mm-hmm. For instance, University of Washington, Augsburg College in Midwest, then also University of Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. Also HPU, mm-hmm. Hawaii Pacific University.
Yes. Oh, well, thank you so much. And for those of our listeners, of course, we know all of them are, very savvy about their world geography, but maybe the one or two listeners out there who may not be familiar with your home country, Slovenia. This is a small nation in Central Europe, of course, part of the former Yugoslavia, a country that is basically bordered by Austria on the north, Italy on the west, Hungary on the east, and then to the south, Croatia. But give us a quick snapshot about the country itself. You've been independent now since about 1991. And this was
Correct.
The breakup. And what else could you add?
Yes, Slovenia is in geographic terms, quite small. It is nowadays a member of European Union. Yes. We entered European Union in 2004. Mm-hmm. Slovenia was also the first Central European country that entered Eurozone mm-hmm. in 2007, and it was for many years presented in mainstream media as a poster child of third way of democratization. Today we could say that Slovenia is maybe for the first time trying to address certain issues that have not been dealt in the past. Our path to independence at the first glance looks as a smooth path towards democracy, but more, I would say, more precise reading of our road towards independence shows that it was more or less a bumpy road. Slovenia is nowadays doing, in economic terms, I would say much. Its performance, it's not as good as in the past. In Yugoslavia, Slovenia was the most developed republic, and our departure from Yugoslavia was, I would say, and this is my reading, more or less connected with our economic reasoning. It's funny, just maybe to give you one example. When I was doing research about public opinion in the late 80s and early 90s, we could see that our goal for reaching independence was not a result of our moral reasoning, so to say, in the sense that we want more freedom, more independence, etc. But it was connected with our strong economy. Slovenian population thought that gaining independence would mean that economy would produce only for Slovenes. That means that the money would stay in the republic. Today, our position in EU is once again many times opening many parallels with our past in Yugoslavia. From 1945 to 1991, we were part of Yugoslavia. And but we must also admit that that period is important when you're traveling across the globe, because when I mention Slovenia, not many people know about Slovenia, where Slovenia is. They often make a mistake and think that Slovenia is Slovakia. But when I mention Yugoslavia, they know, because Yugoslavia was on the global, I would say, arena. In the global arena, it was an important political actor.
Yes. No, very well put. And indeed, it is a country that I would say, for me, has always been an interesting paradox. It is, on the one hand, a new country in the sense of 1991, you gain independence, you're a democracy, at least in this new form that's kind of expanding. And yet, the paradox is you're an old country, a rich heritage, a culture, a history that is clearly defined, that you know, there's a desire to want to preserve. Moreover, I've often had to explain to some, interesting parallels with our own state here in Hawaii. We're a small, relatively isolated on one hand, but we also have a history of, on one hand, sort of colonial rule and part of a larger union. Similarly, you mentioned Yugoslavia. This was part of the confederation that brought together with other neighboring republics there. But today, more independent and more connected perhaps to its neighboring EU members to the north. And yet, what I'm always intrigued by, it is at least the independence that has been in place now 22, 23 years now, has also brought some challenges on many levels. I mean, you're in some ways, your economy is now more, on one hand, more globalized, more interconnected, but at the same time, either more vulnerable or more affected by developments outside, and recent developments in the European Union and in the Eurozone specifically have brought a lot of crisis. And we'll talk a little more about this, of course, to understand both some of the challenges and issues that are confronting countries, and whether it's in the EU in this case or just in the global economy, how interconnected we are. It brings both opportunities but real costs and challenges. From the standpoint of Yugoslavia, it breaks apart, and you describe Slovenia as having been, how did you describe it? Maybe it was one of the poster childs. In the early first decade, it was seen as the country that did quite well. It had a pretty relatively violent-free independence, because you didn't see the violence of neighboring countries, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, and yet you fast forward now 2 decades, this third decade now of independence, and it's a tougher time today. Maybe describe some of the situation these days in Central Europe and in Slovenia in particular.
In political science, we often identify 3 main factors for success in reaching a stable democracy: politics, policies, and luck. Slovenia had all 3. When we gained independence, we gained it without a long war. The war lasted in Slovenia only 10 days. In other Yugoslav republics, we know that the war was much more severe, and it lasted for many years. So Slovenia was able to so to say, hit the ground running. It was able to start working on joining European integration, and it also entered the phase of so-called stabilization of democracy, when the European economies and also the global economy was gaining in strength. But this is also I would say the negative side, because we were not forced to seriously do everything that is much needed to really gain a democratic society. More or less, if I now make a reference to Thomas Paine, we did not detect the important difference between the state and the society. More or less, we were focused just on state building. On the other hand, we did not seriously consider that democracy means also a redefinition of our attitudes, of our aspirations. And in the middle of financial and also political crisis in Europe, and especially in Slovenia, because financial crisis hits Slovenian economy and Slovenian society very hard. We see that there are many tasks that still need to be addressed. Basically, I often tell to my students here in the States that they should understand democracy in 2 ways: as a verb and as a noun. And we understood democracy only as a noun, as a new constitution, as a separation of the different branches of government, and that's it. And we did not understand that democracy also means a clear commitment to certain attitudes that would mean also respect and tolerance for different and others. Of course, you can preserve certain standards of democracy when the economy is doing well, but when the crisis hits Slovenia, we suddenly put those democratic standards as not important, as something that we should, for instance, respect for minorities, or respect for certain human rights and so on, as something that we can address later on when Slovenian economy will be stronger. Of course, we know that democracy starts with a strong commitment to political and human rights of every single member of polity.
Yeah. Well, very well put. In fact, I guess as I often see it too, the transitions that would occur in Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe, especially the sort of post-communist, or even Yugoslavia, kind of fits into an interesting puzzle, because it wasn't part of the hardline sort of Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe. It had a fair amount of more autonomy and independence from that, and yet it was still part of this sort of socialist model of sorts. But my main point is that as those transitions occurred with the end of the Soviet Union, they weren't all necessarily like revolutionary movements, so that things transformed and changed. You described it well in terms of democracy, maybe in terms of just the institutional arrangements, but it wasn't in the values, or even the transition itself didn't involve like a real struggle for democracy. It was more in some ways either gradual or maybe not complete. Would that be a fair way to say it?
You mentioned one important thing that we don't like to address often back in Slovenia, and that is the quality of democracy in pre-independence and years, and then after 1991. There are many readings nowadays put forward by very, I would say, important intellectuals in Slovenia and also in Croatia, Serbia, and Bosnia, who are offering a new understanding of what was going on. And democracy, indeed, in Yugoslavia was in the late 80s quite strong. It was a different story, and also different position and different starting point to make it.
Yeah, well, very well put. In fact, what we'll do is we'll take a very short break right now to continue this great conversation, as you were describing there, perhaps better understanding what was the world like before this transition, because that has a lot to help us understand how things went. I want to remind our listeners, this is Global Connections in the Think Tech radio series. We're talking with Ziga Vodovnik, a professor from Slovenia and Central Europe, who's going to help us unravel some of the puzzle and some of the interesting things happening in this part of the world. We'll be back in just a minute, so stay tuned for more on the story.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
And welcome back. We're here on Think Tech's Global Connection Show. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and we're joined by Ziga Vodovnik. Ziga, if I may, is a professor at the University of Ljubljana, which is in the charming Central European country of Slovenia. Again, those of you, as we spoke earlier, aren't quite as geographically savvy. We hope as you leave today's show, you'll at least understand where this country is. It's a beautiful country, often described on the sunny side of the Alps. The Alps mountains that cover Central Europe. This is just on the southern part, just below Austria, a fascinating place I've been fortunate to visit on many occasions, and like our beautiful state of Hawaii, has a wonderful natural built environment, a strong appreciation for its own culture. But talking more about politics, economics, it's a country that both, again, some would herald as this poster child of having made the transition, very well integrated now into the new European Union, part of the Eurozone. But as we see in a lot of sort of newer emerging democracies or transition democracies, real challenges. And we were talking a moment ago about, in the case of, Slovenia, this country that breaks off from the former Yugoslavia, becomes independent in 1991. I think often naively we have many people think that everything started from them, as if there was no history before that. But in fact, part of what was then the Yugoslavia was itself an interesting experiment, one that for our listeners, some may know more about this, others may not. But Yugoslavia was this bold experiment, comes out of World War I initially, the Versailles Treaty that helped to sort of carve up some of the map of Europe, the breakup of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire. Yugoslavia brings together a collection of several peoples, the Slovenes, Croats, Serbians, and some other neighbors in the south. And during the first period, 20s, 30s, 40s, it's kind of evolving, but post World War II, it takes on, maybe give us a quick version of maybe the story there, but more particularly, as you were getting at, in some ways Yugoslavia had a form of democracy, a certain level of participation that was going on. I know I'm familiar with some of the innovative things they did in terms of like worker management relations that were self-management as it's described. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Slovenia and other ex-Yugoslav republics did start from a different position than other Eastern European countries, because Slovenia was never part of so-called Warsaw Bloc, and it was one of the core countries within the non-aligned movement. But Yugoslav economy and also Yugoslav political elites were somehow able to develop a third path that would combine certain features from the Western market economies, and on the other hand, also ideals of socialist social order. Here there are many different readings of the success of Yugoslav experiment, but one thing is sure, that Yugoslavia and also Yugoslav society was able to experience much more, I would say, democratic social order than, for instance, Poland, Czech Republic, you name it. Yugoslavs were able to travel abroad, but still, of course, there are many problems with the economy and also in political affairs. But we should also never underestimate the importance of two oil shocks in the 70s. Yugoslavia was doing, Yugoslav economy was doing very well. The country was in these terms, in economic terms, important economy. And also, it was able to recover from the Second World War with huge success. All societies, Slovenian, Croatian, Serbian, were rural societies after the Second World War. But only in two decades.
Rural, that's right.
Only in two decades they were able to industrialize. And the other important factor was global positioning of Yugoslavia. As I mentioned, it was an important member of a non-aligned movement, and that opened many new markets for Yugoslav companies in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East. And this is something that Slovenia later on did not cash in, if I can put it this way, because we wanted to start from the scratch, from the zero, and whatever was Yugoslav was something that we should put
sort of frowned upon, or negatively.
To put in, to leave behind. Of course, in global affairs, you should be very pragmatic if you want to succeed on the global market, and this is something that we did not understand as an important factor for Slovenian economy, for Slovenian companies, and also for Slovenian political recognition. Although it's a small country in geographical terms, it could be in political terms much more influential if the political elite in Slovenia would understand this history.
Well, that's very well put. And one of the things that first I want to remind our listeners, we have a very new exciting issue that's available to us now. I should say, you have the option, as we're now getting several people tweeting into us, and I want to encourage any of our listeners who might be with us live at the moment to send in any questions you might have. We can receive them at ThinkTechHI. That's all spelled together, ThinkTechHI. And just as an example, we've got some questions coming in about Slovenia, and let me just throw them out and see which one you want to take. We have here in Hawaii, we have Slovenian students who come here to study. Some of them, graduates, will stay around, and I imagine that this is a challenge many countries face around the world. When your graduates or young generation go out and study, do they essentially become a brain drain? Do they come back? On one hand they can, but sometimes they don't. Some thoughts about that. And then maybe another aspect about students, especially, that are so critical in any part of the world. Students are connected globally, of course, in this new technologies that we have. They're involved in a lot of activism, and that you described, like this industrialization that has, of course, come perhaps in recent decades to Slovenia. It's put a lot of challenges on the environment and maybe conditions of work. And what role do either students have? Are they concerned about these issues? Is there a certain level of activism going on? Or more immediately, we see in recent years serious crisis, fiscal crisis, the debt crisis in other countries of Southern Europe, which is having an impact on Slovenia. How are these things playing out in terms of the youth populations and sort of activism?
I think I got one of the best jobs. It's not only a job; it's a vocation and profession, to put it this way. And doing with students is something that gives me optimism. We do have, as you already detected, important economic and political challenges ahead of us, but the younger generation that is now finishing colleges in Slovenia is the one that has got a new, fresh understanding of democracy, that democracy should not target economic output of a country, that there are other issues that do not have any economic meaning, but should be addressed. The younger generation nowadays in Slovenia and also in Europe are important factor that could maybe push European project to a higher level. EU is still more or less very unstable integration of different economies. Of course, this economic integration also resulted in certain political developments. For instance, that certain borders were removed. Of course, we should not then underestimate the importance of the Schengen border. That is something that we should seriously address and reform as soon as possible. But the younger generation in Slovenia and in Europe do have this attitude that goes beyond narrow nationalism. They do have this idea that the world out there is much more plural, that democracy should mean respect for others. And this redefinition of what democratic political community is something that I can find with my students.
Very well put. And as you described, I mean, as a professor, you have this ability to both analyze it and see it from maybe the concepts and the history and the trajectory, but you then have this fresh perspective, people who are looking at these issues for the first time and what they might be saying. Now, I'm wondering, again, the experience of Slovenia, not very different from many other places that are going through transitions, impacted by globalization, by integration, and all these forces. On one hand, democracy means many things. It's the sort of institutional variables that you noted, but it's also the values that are, in society, beliefs. And I can't help but wonder when I think of Central and Eastern Europe, that transition, and perhaps this is more pronounced in some of the former, Eastern European countries, that were more locked into, let's say, a communist model. But clearly, the transitions are ones that have now opened these societies. There's somewhat more transparency. The political system is, whether it works well or not is one thing, but it certainly exposes more things. And I often note that now people can kind of see the ugly things that are going on underneath. That is, if you could envision a more authoritarian system, you have the ability to kind of keep a lid on things. Democracy kind of opens up more, and then it leaves many people at times a little bit disenchanted or frustrated, or when you're exposed to more of the corruption and have maybe some ability to voice it more, it fuels that. So again, this is maybe the notion of our own founding fathers had, that democracies are messy and scary, and yet democracy is something that by and large we all want. We think it's a better form of government than some other more authoritarian system. How are these struggles playing out in Slovenia? You've got democracy coming now, and yet you also have a real crisis on one hand of legitimacy, of corruption scandals and the like. Describe a little bit of that context.
I would position myself with those political theorists who say that political elites also in Western democracies are very afraid of democracy, in reality, of the demos. Because also in the past, democracy was a pejorative word. It didn't mean the power of the people. In ancient times, democracy meant the mob rule. And the same attitude towards democracy we do find in European project, where political and economic elites are afraid to understand and to receive alternative visions of European project from below. We do have this obsession with how we will address fiscal deficit, but we do not detect that we also have a democratic deficit in Europe. We do not pay any attention on developing new political institutions and channels that will enable new generations to really understand EU project as also as a project that could erase the borders from the political map, that would enable them to be part of decision making. We do have tremendous developments in IT, but still nothing is done in a sense that would enable younger generations to be part. To put one radical thesis, this political marginalization of the masses and also younger generations in Europe is something that is very suitable for political elites, because you don't have to do the messy thing. That means trying to count in more demands, more alternative visions of what is on the agenda, what are the problems. The problems are not only the markets, the problems are also the future of younger generations who don't have any option to become full members of society. They finish colleges, they got unprecedented knowledge, but they cannot become part of the economic model because there are no jobs for them. Yeah. In certain European countries, the unemployment rate for younger generation between 20 and 30 is almost 50%. Yeah. And this is really frightening.
Yeah. Well, you're touching on a number of issues, and we're going to continue our conversation. Right now, we'll take a very short break, and as we return, and we're exploring issues here with Dr. Ziga Vodovnik, a professor from Slovenia. Also going to talk a little bit about a book that he's just published this last year. It's called A Living Spirit of Revolt: The Infrapolitics of Anarchism. We'll see how this kind of ties in, although it touches on a lot of issues in social movements in the U.S. It really speaks to relevant issues today. Some of the challenges you were describing of a young population coming into the workplace, coming into this globalizing world, which is exciting on one hand, and yet a very harsh reality that economic conditions are not always what you might have hoped. Well, stay with us, and we'll be back in just a short break with more on the story.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaiian Foreign Trade Zone, number 9, has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBED, the Hawaii Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program. It does so to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Jay Fidel of ThinkTech. Mahalo.
Aloha and welcome back. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez of Global Connections here, part of the ThinkTech series. And we're joined today by Ziga Vodovnik, a professor from Slovenia. A nice, charming young country, a small country, but also a country with a rich heritage that's located right in the heartland of Central Europe. It's a country at the crossroads of so many options. What used to be the East-West divide, of course, that's all being redefined. Even the notion of maybe a more Southern Europe with the Central and Northern Europe. But maybe I want to turn our attention to a little bit, the youth and the population we've been talking about in a country like Slovenia, like many other countries in that region. They are part of a new, sort of more globalized world, and they are, on one hand, even your country, as European Union members, you carry a passport that says you're part of this EU, club. And I'm curious, from your perspective, is there a growing, or even has there ever been a sense of a European identity, and specifically for a small country like you? I mean, if you're German or you're French, I mean, people, know what that means. Slovenian, what exactly does that mean? Talk a little bit about this question of identity and how it's evolving, how it's shaped, and how it's in some cases blurry.
European project could be addressed on many different dimensions. We already mentioned the problem of understanding EU project only as an economic project that would try to address the issues and demands of the markets. And we do also have this different understanding of a European project that would be a new political project that would mean a new chapter in the development of democracy. Needless to say that the focus of European elites is still on the first, on economy. But also European project did strengthen to a certain degree a new understanding of democracy and of European integration, with many interesting projects. Just to give you an example, our students are members of so-called Erasmus program. That means that European students from either from Slovenia, Sweden, UK, or Germany should spend a semester or academic year abroad.
Yeah, so there's a lot of mobility of students that goes on.
And
yes.
this was, I must say, interesting project that did strengthen this European spirit, sense with the
just
younger
to clarify, today in Slovenia, I mean, I've had the opportunity to do a number of visits and lectures there, and of course, I'm at the university, and the students there have a pretty strong, good knowledge of English. Would it be fair to say that most of the younger population today in Slovenia have a working knowledge of English language, and then in some ways that helps connect them to UK, Germany, other European countries?
Not only knowledge of language, they got this cosmopolitan attitude.
Mm-hmm, yes. Okay.
We often forget that not only technological but also social development is gaining in velocity and with every single generation. And to give you one example, the classes back in Slovenia are more or less mixed classes. That means that you got students from across the globe. Then, on the other hand, every single student from Slovenia, when he finishes college, he's got this idea of what is going on in Portugal, in Spain.
I should add that it's increasingly she, because most of the students I end up teaching, a higher percentage tend to be young women.
Correct.
Yes.
But still, the idea of European project is a problematic one.
Yeah.
I often go to this extreme case: is European project marked by the Schengen border, very problematic, almost militarized border that is nowadays on the outside borders of EU, and that results in many tragedies, as thousands who want to make it to EU and then they tragically end in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea when they try to reach Lampedusa, small island close to Italy. Or is EU project, on the other hand, characterized or marked by technological breakthroughs of European countries? Somehow these two things don't go together, and we should broaden the spectrum of issues when we are thinking about European identity, what European identity should be. Also, European identity is nowadays too many times a result of political power play. We could see that a couple of years ago, when political elites were trying to draft the European constitution, and then they tried to put in this religious element where they were trying to link European project with Christianity. But this is a historical mistake. We don't have Islam in Europe. We got European Islam. This is an important part of our identity, of development in philosophy, and we could go on. So to really think about European identity, maybe we should give this to European demos, and this should not be only a task and privilege of European political elites. So to achieve this, we should also frame new channels how to integrate our political membership into European project. More or less, citizens of EU are nowadays first citizens of nation states, and through various countries they participate on the EU level. And we don't have this direct option to really become EU citizen. To be even more precise, in Europe we got many of those who are so-called denizens and margisans, who work there, who contribute to the well-being of society, but they don't have a passport of Italy, Slovenia, UK, you name it, and they cannot be members of European political community.
Would these be foreign nationals that happen to be there, but they don't have the full status as a
maybe they do
citizen?
have
Working rights, maybe, but
yeah.
not citizenship rights, in effect.
Many don't have papers at all.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, it's a challenge. Again, we see it throughout the North American economy as well, a big issue, and it's part of this globalization that we are, on one hand, pulling people that are needed, and then in some cases they're being pushed from their respective home countries. Well, we're going to take another final short break here, and we'll be back in just a moment to continue this conversation, and as well we'll have a chance to talk very quickly about his new book that's just been published, A Living Spirit of Revolt, and we'll take a few more questions. I want to just remind our listeners, you have the opportunity to send in some questions through tweets, and you can do that at ThinkTechHI, ThinkTech Hawaii, but just HI. So stay tuned. We'll come right back after a short break.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High-Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on Think Tech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
Aloha and welcome. We're back, we're live, and we're Think Tech. This is Global Connections, the show brought to you by the Think Tech series, and I'm your host, Carlos Juarez. We've been having a great conversation now with Ziga Vodovnik, an academic, a political scientist from Slovenia in Central Europe. And of course, we're talking about this country, and it has a lot of similar issues going on. You described a lot of the growing integration and maybe issues and challenges related to that with other European countries. Slovenia itself is a relatively homogeneous society, a small country, again, homogeneous in that 80-90% are Slovene. You don't have as much of the mixed population that you might find in some of the neighboring countries to the south. But on the other hand, it is at a crossroads that I described earlier, and Europe has for many decades now had a pretty steady flow of immigrant workers that come, whether from the south, whether at different times maybe Greece and Turkey would be sources of many workers into places like Germany. In recent years, you've tended to see a lot of either Middle Eastern or North African or Sub-Saharan African. Have these been an issue in your country of Slovenia, immigrants coming into the European Union through?
Not really.
Yeah.
Slovenian economy is not doing very well nowadays, and that is one factor. The other is, as you mentioned, that Slovenia is a very homogeneous society, and it does not allow that others and different could become members.
It's not as easy. If you travel to Vienna or to Berlin, you can find opportunities and blend in more.
And also, becoming political is quite hard in new democracies.
Yes.
All countries that reached democracy with so-called third way of democratization do have one important problem, that they often understand democracy as ethnocracy. We do have this important thinking also in Slovenian language, where citizenship does not target or evoke city, but it's linked to the state. And that means often that our idea of citizenship is reserved for those who are from here, the idea Blutenboden ideology, the land and blood, and the result is that we do have important problems and also political disputes. Also, when it comes to those who are members of Slovene society in ex-Yugoslavia, but come from other republics. There was
A
one
Macedonian or a Montenegrin,
or from Serbia.
that emigrated to Slovenia.
And we didn't have this system that everyone should automatically then become a citizen of Slovenia. There was one procedure that they should apply for it if they are not ethnically Slovenian. This is something that's going on. So to put a short answer to your question, it's very hard to be a migrant, I guess, in Slovenia, especially if you're not in one of the bigger cities, for instance in Ljubljana, where you do have glimpses of this cosmopolitan spirit that you can find in London or Honolulu or Vienna.
Yeah. Now, very quickly, and then we'll finish with a quick overview of your book. But a question I have is more about, Slovenia again. Now that it is more integrated, for better, for worse, and obviously it's a mixed bag depending on where you're sitting, what you ask. But that same process of globalization and integration has also meant both more foreign investment coming in, but even opportunities. And specifically, I'm curious, are there opportunities for younger generation of Slovenians to essentially take on entrepreneurial initiatives? Again, it's a more open world now, and they have those opportunities, or other type of startups, companies. I mean, anything you could say very briefly about this?
It's very hard since my focus is more or less on political issues that Slovenian polity is facing. Maybe I would rather say something about other challenges that are ahead of the younger generation in Slovenia. They do have outstanding knowledge. I must say that the public school system that is in Slovenia ranks our students top on the international rankings. But the problem of our society is that it has this traditional idea of what economy should do. We still got the idea that there is real economy and there is this other thing, that is of secondary importance. And this is also the card that political elites played in the middle of financial crisis, because they wanted to show that there is still the industry and the real economy, and there are the others who are parasites on the real economy. And if you got this idea of what society and economy looks like, then you do not detect all new knowledges and opportunities that younger generation has got. Nowadays, a brand can sell much easier and with higher price tag than one finished product. But if you got still this idea that we should be focused on manufacturing things and not broadening the spectrum what is important in society, then you do not open opportunities for younger generations, and the result is that you got 30% of youngsters who are unemployed.
Yeah, but quite smart. They can be smart,
very smart
taxi drivers or smart workers in any area.
But
that's not fair.
That is many times insult to the injury.
Yes, I understand, and I meant that as a very bad joke, of course. It is, again, one of the challenges of this globalization and interdependence, that yes, there are opportunities and no doubt many winners, but equally this vulnerability, I think, that happens now, that whatever might happen in some other countries, a crisis in Greece suddenly becomes a very real challenge because it affects, either investments or patterns and unemployment, particularly at a time when you've got a well-educated younger population suddenly facing limited options. So it is a real challenge, no doubt.
And of course, we got so-called international division of labor also within the European project. The world system analysis or world system theory was so popular in social sciences. It was a theory, just to give a brief explanation to viewers, where certain sociologists and political scientists tried to understand how global economy is doing, and they detected the global north and global south, how you got the core countries and countries on periphery, and how countries on periphery are working and supplying human and other resources for the countries in the core. the same model can nowadays be applied to the European project, where you got core countries, as France and Germany, and you got the poor periphery.
The Romanians, and the
Portugal,
Croats, the Portuguese.
Spain, Italy, Slovenia, that are basically just doing, they don't have an independent economy anymore, but they are only filling gaps in German and French economy. So this is one of the paradoxes of globalization.
Yes, yes. Well, it is. And, our conversation has taken us into some great topics. And I want to say, gosh, I hope we can come back to continue the dialogue. But one of the things we want to do next chance we have is talk a little bit more about your book. It looks at a lot of other issues, perhaps in an earlier period, in another context, the living spirit of revolt. But you've touched on some topics that I think reveal the challenges of social, political changes. So it's an exciting time, but also a time of a lot of uncertainty. And we're going to have to close on this. I want to thank you again, Dr. Vodovnik, for joining us here on Global Connections, sharing some insights from your perspective as a European, as a scholar, and a political scientist that analyzes these important times we live in. For our viewers, we're going to have to close on that, and we thank you for joining us here. I just want to remind all of you, of course, that all of our shows are kept here as podcasts. You can download them anytime from the thinktechhawaii.com website, and just remind you as well that we air all of these weekdays, and you have opportunities to join us either watching it live or follow up afterwards. Let me close on that and look forward to joining us here. The next show we have coming up soon on Global Connections. I'm your host, Carlos Juarez, and we've been joined today by Professor Ziga Vodovnik of the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. And thank you, Ziga, for wonderful insights, and we'll have to do this again.
The pleasure is all mine.
Aloha.